everyone.
Woo!
Welcome to our session.
I got applause before we started. So this is exciting.
Exactly. So I want to start off with some ground rules. This is not a product conversation. This is a discourse on how AI is changing everything we know or thought we knew about DevOps. I'm Andrew Flick, and I lead developer GTM at Microsoft, and I'll be your moderator for what I hope is fast-paced and candid conversation. We're joined by some of the most influential voices in software delivery, names behind Accelerate, Phoenix Project, the Space Framework, and the product vision that helped shape GitHub into the AI platform that it is today. Is that overselling?
A little bit, but it's fine.
Okay. We're going to explore 4 key themes: the rise of agentic DevOps, what bold predictions on maturity and what that looks like in the new era, how we forecast the measures of success to change, and we won't shy away from something a bit provocative, the human element. Should probably grab a clicker. Before we dive into the themes, I want to give each of my presenters here an opportunity to introduce themselves and talk about their perspective about what's happening now. So Martin, we're going to start with you because you're sitting right next to me. You've had a front row seat to how GitHub is evolving, and I know sometimes in our conversations you're a skeptic and a fast believer a little bit later. So why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on now.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Martin Woodward, currently VP at GitHub. Prior to that, before I came over, I did helped out with a bunch of kind of stuff at Microsoft when they were changing how we open source things and how we approached open source and how we modernized our engineering systems, and then did startup and stuff before that. The thing where Andrew says I'm a skeptic is because he knows that when I got the call about Copilot, and we've got this crazy research project, but when we're thinking of turning it into a product kind of thing, want to give it a try. I was like, oh yeah, well, AI, whatever. And then brought it on and sort of sat and talked with the team for a bit. And there was some interesting conversations around like cost of interaction stuff, and actually using it and just autocomplete. I was like, oh, this is working. This is crazy. And then when we started you go back to those versions and those models now, and it was so nowhere near as sophisticated as it is now. But I was like, oh, this actually works. And then I think my comment to you was something like, this doesn't suck, Andrew. This is quite exciting. And so we've been using that since, and yeah, it's been good.
I think you've said things like, developers aren't going to use this.
Yeah,
no
well,
way.
to be fair, I was also the person that didn't think TypeScript was going to take on either. Yeah, I was open sourcing, was working with Amanda and Anders to open source TypeScript, and they came and asked me, and I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll help. But JavaScript developers are never going to use this. So I don't have an awesome track record for my predictions in tech.
No, you're fantastic. Whenever we're doing a feasibility test for a new product, we'll ask you, and the opposite is
if it
what
doesn't
we'll do.
suck, then it's
Right.
fine.
Nicole, you've spent years helping the world understand developer experience, how to do better. What are you up to now?
Well, now I'm doing more of the same. So I think developer experience is super important for the way that we build software, because we can either do things on hard mode or we can do things on easy mode. And I think AI is just amplifying the importance of that. Right.
Great. Gene, you spent your career helping us understand how high-performing technology organizations work. Now I hear you're back into code.
Yeah, right. In fact, my title on my badge is used to be like author and researcher, and now it's vibe coder, author and researcher. So I can't overstate just how much fun I'm having these days. I mean, we spent 10 years studying high-performing technology organizations. We worked on the state of DevOps research and Accelerate, but what I'm working on now is on a book called Vibe Coding with Steve Yegge. So anyone who's studied DevOps knows about the way he chronicled the famous Jeff Bezos memo, how Amazon went from one monolith with 3,000 developers to the thou shalt only communicate through APIs. And so I met him last year, and the moment that changed my life was we pair programmed for 2 hours, and to my amazement, in 47 minutes. I wrote a program to, take a screenshot of a podcast, a YouTube video. Whenever I hear something interesting, I take a screenshot. And over the last 15 years, I have 5,000 of these. I've gone back 3 times, to try to, it's just so much work. And we transformed, that into a YouTube excerpt, a video excerpt that, with captions. And so something like that just changes your life. And so it's amazing watching Steve Yegi generate on good days 13,000 lines of production-ready, high-quality code that he's committing into production for a game that he's been working on for 35 years. So like sort of seeing numbers like that just changes your life. Anyway, so that's what I'm working on, and I'm just delighted to be here with two friends.
This is awesome. So I feel like we're going from skeptic to believer.
Yeah, yeah. I think like you, I consider myself a pretty skeptical person for the majority of my life. But you have these moments where you can do things that you never could have done before, right? And I remember February 2024, I asked ChatGPT, write something that's, here's a YouTube screenshot. It has no timestamp on it. Find the progress bar and compute like what percentage complete is it. And like got most of it in one shot. And I'm like, holy cow! I've never written that function like that in Java. I don't know what an image class is, a stream IO, whatever, and it worked. So it changes you and changes your mind.
All right, well, we're going to dig into the themes of today, and the first theme that we have is agentic DevOps. So Gene, I've actually got you listed as the #1 person on this one. What does agentic DevOps mean to you?
Yeah, someone who's very famous in the Microsoft community, I have a ton of admiration for, is Dr. Eric Meyer. So he was part of Visual Basic. He was part of the C# project. He created Link, right? Went on to create the hack language at Facebook Meta. And he had a wonderful definition that was vibe coding and agentic coding is not writing code by hand, right? Like some sort of primitive caveman, right? Like who would do such a thing? And Nicole and we were talking before about we're both spending a lot of time writing, but we don't write because we love typing, right? We love writing because it creates clarity of thought, it helps communicate ideas. I don't think on my top 100 would be because I love typing, right? And so I think what does it mean to me? It means to be able to get assist, right, in helping you achieve your goals. And for me, here's like another moment where I just became a believer. I spent 45 minutes trying to write a program to connect to the Trello API. I was trying to use attachments, which I had never done before. And I kept on getting 401 errors. And 45 minutes in, I'm using coding agent, and it's telling me type this, type that. And at 45 minutes in, I get so frustrated. I'm like, stop bossing me around. You type it, right? It's like, I can't run curl. It's like, write a program that is like curl. 45 seconds later, tried 6 different iterations and said, oh, you just need to use the OAuth authorization header convention, whatever that is. Like who would, I mean, how does that not change your life, right? To go from I'm copying and pasting between 2 different windows, trying things over and over again, right, to it doing it for you, right? To me, that's the power of like agentic coding, where like you're not being bossed around by the AI, right? And you're getting, you can do so much more, faster, more ambitious, do things alone, have more fun, and explore a much larger option space. Sorry for the long answer, Andrew, but hopefully, has anyone here felt that like aha moment, or like had that sort of moment where like, holy cow, I will never go back to the old way? Raise your hand. Yeah. So, and for those of you who are more skeptical, just I would encourage you to at least try it, because you will, and when you find yourself copy and pasting, whether it's from Stack Overflow or from an AI LLM, just realize there might be a better way.
Martin, I gotta do skeptic check.
Okay.
Believer, not believer?
Oh, I'm 100% a believer, unfortunately. You know what I mean? Like, I know.
Oh no, does that mean it's not gonna be a thing?
Yeah, well.
Or it's gonna be a thing?
Oh, yeah. Uh-oh. Fascinating. I don't know. Yeah. It's the thing that is hard to, I mean, this is related to your work as well around developer experience. It's hard to express how much joy it brings to be able to solve problems quickly. That's why we do what we do, because we enjoy, you don't enjoy typing. You enjoy solving problems with a computer. And the number of times you build something and then you just, if you do it and you do it right, and it kind of disappears, and then you just sit there playing with it, go, this is amazing. Like those moments, the number of moments I get when I am, like, I guess you call it vibe coding. You know, when you are.
Just say it. I was vibe coding.
Yeah, when I'm vibe coding, yeah, I guess. I'm proud. But it's, the joy is hard to express, and it's that kind of love of problem solving. Now, obviously, doing it in a responsible way, in an ethical way, in a controlled way, like there are areas where I still think as an industry, we are developing what our best practices are, and it's a very fast-moving world. But believer, I think.
You know what, actually, that hits upon things. I mean, I think over the past many years, we've seen DevOps evolve. We've seen security in DevOps or DevSecOps, whichever religion you are there. And when I think about AI, you kind of talk about trust. And Nicole, you've been, an advocate of the space framework, inventor of the space framework, and kind of thinking about that. But in the world of AI, how do you see trust play into this? How do you define that?
It's a great question, and I think it's going to, and it is, it's going to continue to play an increasingly important role, right? If we think about, jump in the Wayback Machine a few years ago, right? We could take for granted that, I coded a thing and it compiled, so it works, and I might have some flaky tests, but it's fine. I'll just rerun them or skip them, right? But things worked or they didn't. But if they worked, you could just kind of trust it and go. Now, though, when we're working with these non-deterministic models, right, they're giving us answers to the things that we're prompting or asking, and now suddenly we need to kind of verify what it gave us. And we need to verify it earlier, and we're verifying it in real time, right? We're not waiting for a PR. We're not waiting for something to happen down the line. And so while trust was always there, right? One of my first papers was about trusting and having verification information, but now it's just front and center. And so I'm looking for ways to measure it or understand it. Measure is not quite the right word, right? But how do we want to understand it, and how does that impact the way developers write code? Because I think there's this aha moment, but for me, it's also how do you get to that aha moment, right? Was it really hard? Was I in the flow? Was I concentrating on stuff that's just frankly, I shouldn't say worthless, right? But sometimes a config file is just a config file and it's fine, but that's not the core problem. And so how do we kind of track and understand ways that we can improve things like flow, cognitive load, trust, and then minimize all of these points of friction that just aren't very important?
When you think about trust, you hit on the cognitive part. What about the emotional aspect? Do you see emotions come into play? I mean, I'm hearing the guy in the end, he's asking it, so it's kind of a leading question. But in your research, how do you think about that?
From a research standpoint, still investigating and still working on it, right? Anecdotally, I would say that it's really interesting to see people and developers use these tools because, we've got folks who are skeptics. We have folks who just love it and they immediately dive in. And watching and understanding and having conversations with the folks and saying, what does it feel like when you get this? Sometimes they look at me like, what do you mean, what does it feel like? Well, when you've gotten all of this code, can you trust it? Do you feel okay about it? Is it exciting? Is it frustrating? Where's the tipping point for that? And what types of tasks are well suited to this? And which types of tasks are not? And and what does the adoption curve look like, right? Sometimes you have to, I'm sure folks here hit a point where you use the tool and only we're using computers in anger, right? But then you kind of reach a point where we figured out how to prompt better. We figured out how to set up our code bases better. We figured out which model is more appropriate. And then even, people who I've chatted with who are skeptics were like, okay, fine. I still kind of hate it, but you can't take it out of me, right? Pry it out of my cold, dead hands. You can't take this tool, so.
I think, as teams are adopting.
Can I riff with that? So you talk about trust. So maybe one superficial definition of trust is to what extent can I predict, how the other person will act and react, or the other party, right? So it's, often that involves time. The longer you know someone, right? Thing, agent, whatever, right? Acts in the way I expect, right? And so when it acts very erratically, does things like trash your code base, delete your branch, create a haunted code base, for something you're using every day. If these seem oddly specific, they are all things that happen to Steve and me. And these are things that definitely erode trust. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about AI is that they're just not really good at instruction following. Right, they have definite limitations on context window, and they often hack the reward function. Right, it wants to be helpful, and so if you say fix 10 tests, right, and if it's 80% of this context window is exhausted, right, in terms of the output context window, it may just take a lot of shortcuts and say all tests pass, right, but it might have disabled them, deleted them, right, and so forth. And so what I find so interesting is that so many of our mental models, how we program, in terms of version control and testing and so forth, are just wholly insufficient. It worked when you were generating 100 lines of code a day, but they are like wildly insufficient when you're generating 10,000 lines of code a day. And I think what's been so fun is kind of exploring what are these practices that, our belief is that, all these risks you can prevent, detect, and correct in your inner, middle, and outer loops, but you have to do them so much more often. In fact, I think it's the Nyquist-Shannon sampling theorem. Like the controlling system must operate at least twice the rate of what you're controlling. So as you speed up, the code generation process, your control systems also have to speed up. Not just a little, but like as much as whatever the increase in frequency is. And so that has been like wildly fun. And so, like one of the comments we got in the book was like, "Oh, Steve, Gene, you're supposed to be so smart. How do you do so many stupid things?" And I think we're actually writing it. It's like, yeah, because if you keep using only the old practices that you had, right, you will find yourself crashing the car a lot, right? And so it's a wild time to be alive. How am I doing? This is resonating with you?
No, 100%. I mean, the interesting thing that we found as well is around that adoption. When we've done deployments and help people upgrade and help people modernize and getting on DevOps training and things like that for years, but adopting these AI tools doesn't follow the same pattern that doing a DevOps adoption did or like a process modernization path did. We're seeing the more innovation curve is across every organization that we touch on. People, who's rolling out Copilot in their orgs right now? Who's got Copilot? Right. So what happens in every single org I've met, and including Microsoft, and including GitHub, is that you give Copilot to everybody or whatever, and like 25% of people, like that exact early adopter bit, 25-30% of people grab Copilot and use it. And then if that's where you stop and you don't like kind of do some stuff around like crossing the chasm and helping people adopt, then it stops there. And then you need to do things to convince people, to help the skeptics come along. You need to like help them learn how to talk to this thing better. To get to we're now at GitHub over the hump of the curve and we're now going down kind of thing. But other organizations, they can get completely stuck at that early adoption place.
I have a story from a friend of mine. He's he owns a bunch of SREs, and he showed Steve and me we got a text message from him. He's like, senior engineers, if there's two things they hate, is PowerPoint slides and reports. It's like, why am I getting so many reports and graphs? Right. All I'm getting from my senior developers are reports and PowerPoints of how bad AI is. Like they're trying to get in front, stop the train, right? This is interesting, right? It's like a lot of programmers of a certain age, right? Senior developers, they're initially very resistant to it, which is just interesting. It is the adoption curve, right?
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the adoption curve, but I think before we get into that.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. You're on the front lines of this. You're on the front lines of innovation. You've seen a lot of things that AI can do. I'm curious when you think about the agentic DevOps and you think about the different components of DevOps, what are the types of tasks and jobs that you think it will do?
Like jobs as in
Jobs to be
jobs?
done.
Or
No,
jobs
not people. Jobs to be done.
Yeah. God, it's hard to know where the limits are right now. Well, the thing that AI isn't creative. So that's why coding with AI, I think, is joyful, because you're focusing on solving, that your creativity is being used in solving the problems and understanding what's going on, whereas the AI is helping you with the implementation details. And so, a straightforward, you've seen demos of it today. It's already here. Like a straightforward migration of a .NET version from one to the other, or a Java version from one to the other. That's a great job for an AI. Fixing security defects when you've already got the security defect found and you've already got how these security defects work. That's a great job for an AI because you've given it absolutely all of the context it needs. What they're not good with is, ambiguity. Well, it makes stuff up. And then, there's a story here then. And then ambiguity and creativity. The creativity, it's not creative, it's a randomness machine. But then again, so humans doing that is great. The interesting, thought process you go when you start to use these machines, though, is like, well, how much of my creativity is randomness? You know, how much of my creativity is from the temperature control in my brain? So, but anyway, that's more of a over beers conversation rather than a before beers conversation. But yeah.
To your
Sorry.
point, I mean, about creativity, Jerry Seinfeld famously said, comedy is a game of tonnage. Right? Meaning, like, you know, you have to type out a lot of jokes to find one that's actually funny.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting. It's like to take so many problems and turn it into like a search problem. Just you write tons of drafts, tons of code, right? And then it's now you as a creator, builder, right? To find the right solution, right? It's your restaurant, your Michelin stars, and your fault if something goes wrong.
But I saw you nodding there when I was talking, you know, there was something there that you'd obviously heard from the research or something like that in terms of.
I mean, right on with the adoption curve.
Right.
Yeah, we see that lots of places, and I love the point about, you know, we need to find ways to help other people and like other groups understand, because it could be training, it could be, you know, specific tasks, or, you know, something to try it out on, because we're also finding that on average, this isn't true universally, right? But like in general, most developers who use Copilot are satisfied with it. They feel more productive. They'd be disappointed if they couldn't use it anymore. We also find that if a team is using Copilot, these metrics, like our data around satisfaction and perceived productivity, increase. And I think it's that compounding effect, right? Because like if I'm doing something and I'm on my own, that's kind of fine. But if, you know, my team is, then we learn together what the best ways to use the models are.
Right.
We can debug or diagnose together, and we can learn together, and we can move faster, and then things get better, right? The more I can remove friction, the happier I am, because I can just do some dope stuff.
You know, Martin, when you were answering the question, you hit on a bunch of things. You hit on, you know, security. You hit on app modernization. You hit on a lot of things that an agent could do.
Yeah.
You know, I actually want to reference a little bit from Nicole, so it's actually a question for you. You get a pass.
Oh, okay, great.
Going to Nicole on this. Woohoo! You're working on a book.
I'll see, yeah.
And in your book, you'd mentioned that your DevX breakthrough might be a process and not a tool. And I think as we're talking about the usage of AI agents, that's especially relevant today. And so your book, you talk about things like, hey, let's look at recognizable problems that have visible impact, low-hanging fruit, broad reach, and measurable outcomes. Do you think that the same is true for how we evaluate what AI agents can do for us? And how do you think about that?
I love this question. Thank you. So yeah, I'm working on a developer experience book with Abhi Noda, and a lot of this was shaped by the conversations we've been having around improving developer experience. What is it? Why is it important? How can we, you know, help developers do better work? And then, you know, there's this whole AI movement happening. And so then the question becomes, when we improve developer experience, or even let's take a half step back, is developer experience still important now that we have AI? Please, everyone say yes. The answer is yes. And how do we want to think about improving it? And can we use the same methods, or at least the same principles and frameworks, to think about improving developer work and developer experience? And just, you know, across the hundreds of organizations that we've been talking to, the answer is yes, right? Like, the goal here is to remove friction. The goal is to remove blockers and barriers so that developers can solve problems, can be creative, can do the work that they want to do. And AI, if anything, is just amplifying that importance, because now things are changing super, super fast, right? We were just talking about the rate of change in GitHub.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it in Microsoft, I'm seeing it in other companies, and if we had friction before, I mean, that's no longer a step or a hurdle, that's the Great Wall of China, right? And when you're trying to move really fast, it's so important.
Now, Gene, you've been vibing. And I know we're kind of on the topic of maturity model, and I know you're gonna frown at me on that. But in your experience of vibe coding, how do you think of, you know, maturity in the context of a developer or a developer team? What does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So some of you might notice, like fast, ambitious, alone, fun, optionality. that spells out FAFO, right? So the good FAFO. And we talk about a lot in the individual level, but it's also at the team level. And what I find so interesting is that, I think that the leaders, who kind of set the tone, auditors have a phrase called tone at the top. What they're observing is that, how the leader behaves actually sets the norms and is a high predictor of financial fraud, operational excellence, et cetera. And they also set the tone for use of AI. And so a couple things come to mind, right? There's a guy named Bruno Passos. He's the head of dev platforms at Booking.com. They have 3,000 developers. And one of the things that they found was one of the predictors of what they found to be is a developer going to be productive or not with AI was, did they have training, right? And so when you're dealing with these non-deterministic tools that are very idiosyncratic, right? It turns out training actually matters, right? So that not every person is struggling alone. So Nicole had mentioned that. Two, just hearing how economists talk about this, in a very clinical way. Leaders set the norm of, to what extent are they encouraging everyone to use and invite AI into the daily work. So if you read the book Co-Intelligence by Dr. Ethan Mollick, he said, yeah, you gotta, the frontier is so jagged. Everyone has to be experimenting because no one knows where the frontier is, what AIs are good at, what they're not good at. I was talking with Dr. Daniel Rock, he was part of the OpenAI Jobs Report at the Wharton School. And he actually phrased it in a different way. He said, who will capture the productivity gains? Is it going to be the individual, where something that would have taken a day, they can now do in 2 hours? Do they tell anyone, right? So does the individual capture the gain, or is it, does the team capture the gain? And leaders encourage that by having everyone share their learnings, right? What's a mistake that you made or a lesson that you learned, right? To encourage everyone to, elevate the state of the practice of the entire organization. So one of the things that really excites me so much is that we're still learning how to use this exotic new technology, and that's measured not at the individual level, but at a team level. And so we were talking earlier, Nicole and I were, about how DevOps sort of blew the dev and ops organizations apart. How, who tests, who deploys, that totally changed. Everything shifted left just because the productivity gains were so immense. And I think whatever those productivity gains that we saw a decade ago, I mean, that's at least an order of magnitude higher with agentic coding, AI assisted coding, et cetera. Or as we call it, vibe coding.
Vibe coding.
By the way, I was flying to San Jose from Portland, Oregon, which is where I live, and sitting next to a guy, my memory of him is that he was wearing a beret and black tight pants, like a designer, right? And he goes, "Gee," so we're starting to land, and he said, "Gene, what do you do?" What do you do? I'm like, It was the first time I ever said the word vibe coding aloud to a stranger. I'm working on a book called Vibe Coding, blah blah blah, and his face just lit up. He's like, "You know what? I used to be a coder 10 years ago. Now I'm the director of UX, for a big data company, right? And I just built a Reddit scraper, and people can sign up to and get newsletters every week." And it's just that joy, it just, I think, resonates with so many people. And the reason why I brought that up is that Martin, sitting right next to you, is a guy who was showing me his GitHub commit history that was blank except for the last 30 days. Wow. And the big smile on his face. He said, I used to be a .NET WinForm developer.
Now I'm a PWI Stack developer.
Right, and what does PWI Stack stand for?
PowerPoint, Word, and Excel.
PowerPoint, Word, and Excel. But now he's running a mean stack application, right? And he's so proud of what he's creating, solving his own problems. And I think that's at the individual level. The real big gains come at the organizational level.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We know it's just that's the thing, is that using these tools just brings back the joy of coding, and we see it across all levels. And what's been fascinating, all the things you were just saying there actually resonate with what I'm seeing rolling things out to teams. Having a leader like Sajja and like Thomas here on GitHub who actually do like to code, and coming back and going, "Oh wow, I can code at the weekends now because I've got this thing," because it takes away the churn side. But then also having some training definitely helps. We see with teams, but having, like you were saying as well, Nicole, working as a team doing it, we find Copilot deployment works a lot better if you put some ceremony around it, and you teams have to kind of earn the right to use Copilot, by doing like a workshop where they get to train things and go do on things, and then passing it through. So it's fascinating. We actually do see it. Well, you're probably seeing it in data, and we're seeing it. I'm seeing it like pragmatically. So yeah.
You're hitting on the individual level.
Yeah.
And like I know I gave you a really hard question before. You know, and I think,
No.
Oh, I want to throw water on this, but I'm going to let you all be happy and continue.
no.
Throw water on it now.
Let's do it now.
So, I mean, who in here has used any kind of AI assistive coding tool?
Yeah.
Perfect, right? I do think that it has a lot of opportunity to improve our work and make us happier and remove friction and do all this stuff. Who here has used an AI assistive tool and have been absolutely frustrated by the other systems that are still full of friction that you can't get around? Right? And so I think it's important to realize that having good systems and having good infrastructure and having good kind of supporting pieces, I mean, listen, for years we've been saying it's table stakes. Now it really is, because if you're trying to move fast and you can't get feedback, or you're waiting on some other team to finish a build that's going to take 2 or 3 days, or they're not shipping for 2 weeks, like for a minute it's fun. I get in focus, and I'm having a good time for a couple hours. I'm not writing production code, but I'm writing code that's very fun. But if I have to wait for something because I have to build it, which, listen, there are a lot of big companies we talk to where developers are still having to write thousands of lines of code to ship their own stuff, it's just way less fun.
What are we going to do there? Because the problem is that I think we're all seeing it, that the teams who are most effective at adopting AI tools are the ones with strong DevOps principles and things like that. Are they or not? Because there's this huge, and I'm sorry if this is taking us off our script, but there's this...
You're right on script.
Okay, great.
My job's done. Mic
There's
drop.
this huge spectrum of maturity when it comes to DevOps across the industry still. And if this is the impact of AI, does this mean that the people who are they're going to get further behind with companies or not?
Yes.
Oh. Oop.
Yeah, I think that's true, right? I mean, those practices might serve them well when everyone's committing 50 to 100 lines of code. Sorry about the lines of code, but I mean, just as a proxy measure for something, right? It will serve them very poorly. They're going to have a rough time at 10 times the code generation, so they're not going to get the productivity gains.
Yeah.
And so one of the, the mental model that we want to prove, is the notion that you need architectures that enable independence of action, so that you can, develop, test, and deploy value without having to communicate and coordinate and synchronize and schedule and cajole and all the other things when you have to coordinate with people and other teams. And you need fast feedback loops, right? You need very fast feedback from the system. Is is this getting you closer or further away from your goals? And if you can't create those system of controls, then you're not going to get the productivity gains, right? And I think that's true. Oh, and by the way, there was a talk given by another agentic coding vendor, who said, yeah, we're getting somewhere between 2 to 10x. Developers are reporting 2 to 10x gains until they have to check it into the monolith. And so there's it's as long as they're doing it in their own service, they're getting the productivity gains. But the instant they're coupled, into the big monolith gap that's been around for say 2 years, then life gets harder. And just shows that everything that we learned over the last 10 years, that architecture, fast feedback are one of the top predictors of performance, absolutely true. And it's just the difference is now even more visceral. Does that resonate with you all?
It does, but it also makes me sad. And so, this is why we're trying to, what tools, how can we apply AI and tooling that we're getting there to help, bring people up? What's holding the company back is platforms. Well, that's the problem. Yeah, platform stuff. Then maybe we can do tools there. The problem is what usually holds people back the most is cultural, is leadership, is also a culture of not being able to take risks, of not being able to experiment, of not being able to learn, and some of those sorts of things. So that's what makes me sad, is that I know I can build tooling to help address some of the gaps, but that's not going to fix it because it's more of a cultural.
But I think time is now a factor. Time is of the essence in this. So we think about the term DevSecOps 2012 roughly.
Right.
I talk to people about the time that they thought about implementing those practices, 2015, 2016, 2017, years to go and do these things. Now when I think about what AI does, let's look at security. The ability for bad actors to do harm, if they're using it, their ability to attack is incrementally faster. And if you're not doing good DevOps, and putting security in that, your ability to defend is incrementally worse. Yeah. And so I think about like some of these practices where we talk about the DevOps maturity. Gene, you're right, yes, it needs to be there, but I also think putting that notion of it needs to be there now and faster because this world is changing significantly faster than before.
Nicole, I'm dying to ask, because I agree with you. It makes Martin sad that it once again comes to leadership and cultural norms. But I don't know, for me, I feel like glee and vindication, and like, because it's always mattered, but now it matters even more than it ever did, right? So does it evoke that same reaction for you?
Yes and no. I mean, part of me is, it's like, I don't know, validation, right, might be the right word, where the things that we know are important have been important, and now they are increasingly important, right? Okay. That's just amplified. The thing that worries me a little bit is that there are some leaders that don't see it. They don't quite understand it, right? It's really hard, or I guess let's flip it. It's really important to be able to explain or to understand that having good platforms and processes is a point of leverage, right? And so investing in that is really important. It's not just a cost center. And so many times I still hear CEOs say that, right? It really is a strategic competitive advantage. And when we need to move this quickly, that's really what is going to make or break so many different things. And so, you know, it does come down to technology, but it really comes down to culture as well, right? And I think now especially, you mentioned, you know, learning and ability to fail. When everyone can do like rapid experimentation, your goal should be for at least 50% of the things that you build to fail. Now, that doesn't mean they're in front of customers, right? But that's the power that we have now. We didn't necessarily have that kind of typey on keyboard power before, right? You know, like I couldn't be doing 10 experiments a week or 20 experiments a week, but now I frankly can to make sure I've got the flow right or the interface right or the back end right or something.
Now, I think I know. Let me share one thing that might make you smile.
Okay.
All right, someone once told me that, like, as much as we love DevOps and as much as we love platforms, at no point did the board of directors ever have or asking about the Kubernetes platform or CI/CD, right? But when it comes to AI, like, there's no organization on the planet that has developers that haven't had AI brought up as a board topic. And I was talking to Aidan Cockcroft, who famously was part of the Netflix cloud migration, and he said, yeah, it's like the just mentioning AI is you unlock the, what do you call it, the FOMO budget. It's like, oh, like it speaks to some of the strategic, high strategic, worries about the organization. And there's like two motivators for most people, right? It's greed and fear, right? And so the fact that like you can now tap both the fear and greed thing, attach this budget that have never been accessed before, like $40 million, $10 million, $5 million. They can find that in the couch cushions, right? And so I found so many examples in the enterprise technology leadership community of people tapping this budget, to do things that with the highest levels of sponsorship that has never happened before. Like, hey, let me tell you about my Kubernetes platform. They got laughed, it's like, shut the door on your way out, right? And now it's like, oh, we want to use AI to help us, do distributed experimentation or to help enable frontline service workers to be more productive. Those are conversations that are rarely had. So this is my way of saying there's no technology leader out there who's not dealing with AI at both a strategic level, from a planning perspective, and probably an operational and a project perspective. Does that resonate with you? So take advantage of it.
I think I'm going to put Nicole on the spot on this one, because you've been mentioning measurement. And when we look at AI, everything you see today is with AI or without AI. How much code was committed with AI? How much code was committed without AI? Helpful or harmful?
Both. Is that a fair answer? I think in some ways it can be helpful because it's a relatively easy to get metric, and it can help highlight for people what is possible. and what continues to be possible, right? I think it can be unhelpful in particular because when we talk about lines of code, not picking on you, right? But a lot of times we do see in a rough, not great proxy of data and approximation, many organizations, hundreds of organizations where I've seen some data, when they're using Copilot, their code contribution, lines of code goes up overall, but also lines of code contributed by a person goes up. And so we all know lines of code is trash, right? Lines of code is a trash metric. But that example can help illustrate to less technical leaders the power of using these tools. On the other hand, telling them, using lines of code as an example can have the unintended effect of having them think that lines of code equals productivity, and it does not. So.
Can I expound on that? I mean, I totally agree with Nicole. And I think one of the things that's one thing that I just found riveting is in these interviews of teams working on agentic coding technologies, they're saying, 80% of the code they write, they're using, their own tools to help build tools. The other thing that really caught my interest was, what percentage of kind of like problems are, first mentioned in Slack or Teams and just fixed because they take 30 minutes or less. And essentially, these are a category of work that would not have happened, right? Because it's not worth writing the Jira ticket or the GitHub issue, right? It's like the recording of it is so onerous. And then you got to put it in the backlog and blah, 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 right? And it's like, why bother, right? Instead, it's just fixed in a moment. I think it shows that there's something happening where the transaction cost is dropping so much, where work that never would have been recorded is now being done, right? Someone even called it like all the paper cuts are now sort of disappearing. This is really interesting.
One thing, sorry, go on.
I would say I also suspect that comparison may not be as relevant or used in the next 6 months or a year, because I don't think it will be if you used AI or not. It will be how much did you use AI, for which part of the process did you use AI, or for which category of problems did you use AI, where in the development loop, inner and outer loop, was AI used and leveraged, and more importantly, how did it improve what we do, right? Not just in terms of volume and productivity, how can it improve value? How can it improve quality? How can it improve security, right? And so I think that will be the conversation that I'm also seeing at organizations where, sometimes AI is coming up in board meetings because they are highly regulated and they are panicked, right? And so in those cases, how do we want to think about rolling out AI in ways that are responsible, that are value added, that are perceived as safe and reliable? We talked about feelings before, right? It's important for developers, but it's also important for leaders, because this is in some ways a big shift in how they think about building software in their organizations.
Yeah, and we some data I need to share with you as well, because one of the things that we've seen is the minute we made Copilot available for free to people, so people can use it whenever, we see obviously this massive uptick in MEU of people using Copilot and things, and that exact same time frame, we see a massive. This is across all the internet of of open source, because this is why Copilot Free kicked in. We see a massive uptick in the amount of PRs being generated, and a massive downtick in the average time to merge a PR. And when we were building these tools, when Skeptical Martin was having conversations with you, I had a couple of fears, I'll be honest. One of the fears was, is AI going to reduce the amount of open source that happens in the world, because people don't need, do people still need to consume open source libraries if the AI can just write it and you don't need to take a dependency? Well, it turns out it just recommends open source dependencies because that's the best, most efficient way of solving things. So that's cool. And then the other thing is, are they going to write massive pull requests that nobody can review? And actually no, because to be successful at vibe coding, you find you have to do incremental, you have to work incrementally, and so they write smaller, more discrete chunks with checkpoints.
So just to riff with you, just to nerd out on metrics, Bruno Passos from Booking.com, one of the things that he found was 30% reduction in merge request times and 70% reduction in code diff size. So wow, it's not expected, but for whatever reason, right, people using these practices make smaller diffs and more of them, and get through the process.
Which we always knew was the best practice, but I thought it was like an enforced best practice rather than actually this is what happens when people are set free to do stuff.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, Gene, you kind of got into the question I was going to ask you. The question that I was going to ask you was, in your book, you talk about how AI changes the pace and structure of work as we move from individual productivity to orchestration.
Yeah.
How are you rethinking measurement? And you kind of touched upon it a little bit. So, like, what tells us we're actually getting better and not just faster?
Yeah, so it's funny. When some of these coding agents came out, Steve and I were using it within the first 12 hours. And we had both a kind of a surprising discovery. We both found ourselves using Git commands that we've never used before. Like, basically in the book we wrote, for a decade, Steve Yegge only learned Git in 2020. I've only learned 5 commands, right? I use it basically like a save button, save and restore. But within, what happens is that you're waiting on the coding agent, and you're like, I'm tired of waiting. Let me open up a second one. Steve Yegge routinely has 5 running. He's burning $300 to $500 of tokens per day, right? Because it's worth it to him. So suddenly, you're going to find yourself working on multiple branches at the same time, and suddenly you're using Git cherry commit, cherry pick, commands I barely understand, right? But I don't need to, right? I just ask the coding agent, can you find the diff that does this and bring it, check it into main, whatever, right? It is amazing. And I think what we both realized, we're stunned to discover, is that when you start using coding agents, you are a team, right? You are managing multiple flows of work, and to do that work independently, you're going to probably work on multiple branches, and suddenly you too will be using Git commands that actually you're all working in teams. Like me, I could get away with a very unsophisticated use of Git, and I don't know about you guys, but I found Git to be one of the most intimidating, difficult to understand tools I've ever used in my life, right? So great for Linux kernel developers, maybe not as good for people like me, but anyway, it's just interesting to show that I think the emergent pattern is that once you can do work more asynchronously, you have multiple streams of work. It's almost inevitable, and suddenly you are doing things that only teams do, as opposed to what individual developers do. Does that resonate with you all? Oh,
yeah, and I'm so freaking excited by everybody getting their hands on the coding agent stuff we shipped today, because what we have, obviously, because we're building these tools, so we get basically unlimited tokens as far as we're concerned. There's a bill going somewhere. I don't see it. And so what I'm doing is I got this whole backlog. Screw it. I'm just going to assign this to I just assign these things to Copilot because I've lost nothing. And then there was the other day I was I need to work on something, but I also need to go do some performance review stuff. I'm just going to kick these things off for Copilot. Go do my management stuff, delete emails, and then
performance reviews.
Yeah. Sorry, team who were in there. And then come back and check. And then because we internally in GitHub, because we've got reasonably mature DevOps practices now, we have these things called code spaces, which are containerized dev environments. So you fire up a pull request, you go do the thing, and then you fire up the change in a completely ephemeral development environment that's dropped the thing there. And does it work? Oh, okay. And then you can do the iterations, and then you can send it back to the agent, and it's just, it's the next level, and it's okay, this is going to change things. But to your point, it's managing a team.
Yeah.
Actually, that's my next question, and it was actually tiered towards you. You're just leading into it. My next question was actually what happens to the team?
Oh, yeah. So we were talking about this earlier, right? I think, so Steve Yegge wrote this kind of very interesting blog post that got a lot of attention called The Death of the Junior Developer, which was very provocative, right? Basically, the notion was in any kind of decomposition of tasks, right, in general, right, you got the senior devs who own the top parts of the tree and, assigning it to the leaf nodes to the junior developers, right? And what happens when LLMs can do all the leaf nodes? I think the thinking really now is oh my gosh, when the cost of production goes down, right? You don't end up with 1/10 the number of developers. You end up with 10 times more software. Mm-hmm. And the junior developers are, their job is not going to go away. Their job is to help all these new tech adjacent roles, right? Integrate their work. Because the product owner, the scrum master, whatever, right, who's dependent on the developer, who keeps getting deprioritized because it's not revenue generating, suddenly they can do it themselves, right? And someone's got to help them merge that into the repo. And it's just there's so much valuable work to be done that I think the teams every team will end up owning more stuff. The systems will get larger. I was talking to a guy, UK DEFRA, the
Yeah.
guys who own like basically all the air, water, and food, right, for all the regulation. They found that like in general, like for websites, it's like a 5 to 50 million pound project. So there's all these processes that could never afford to get to be digitized. But like when you 10x, 1/10 the price of it, suddenly everybody can get a website. And it's just, so it's like, now you can get I guess you have to file an application to walk your pig in the UK, right? They are getting, you don't have to fill in a paper form.
Fantastic! I can finally online my walking a pig exercise.
Exactly, right? And so, the bottleneck is they're not in production yet
Yeah.
because they have to change, they have to create training for the people who've worked there for decades, who've always, processed PDF forms, right? Anyway, so it's, boy, there's never been a better time to be in technology, is my feeling.
Yeah, and I think the post you were referencing was the death of the junior developer.
Yeah.
And so, Nicole, I'm going to actually come over to you and actually think about like, what does responsible leadership look like to provide a good developer experience in this era of AI?
First of all, death of the junior developer, no. Okay? This is not real. And I think there are a few things to, take into consideration here. Gene just mentioned when we have so many more things that we can build, and we can build them so much faster, we need more people developing, right? We need more junior developers. And also, I like metrics. I'm a numbers person because often I like to win fights with numbers. Occasionally I'll have people come and they'll say, well, our developers are generating this much more code, so I don't need as many developers. I'm like, okay, let's assume that's true. How are your senior developers using this? How are your architects using this? And then suddenly it's like crickets. And I'm like, just because you see an impact from junior developers that you think, like that's the only place you're getting value and therefore I just don't need as many developers. That's not true. It's just that those are the things that we've like instrumented really easily, right? Like I can find lines of code, I can find diffs, I can find commits, I can find PRs. But we're seeing that like senior developers are also finding a lot of value in this in things like design docs and architecture reviews, but we just don't have like the super easy metric there. And so I think we'll see this value creation and just capabilities improve. And what that means is we need people at all levels. We will continue to need junior engineers. We will continue to need mid-level engineers. We'll continue to need senior engineers. And also, like, let's just say everything I said you don't believe, fine. How are you going to get senior engineers if you don't have junior engineers? Like, that's also sadness. That only leads to sadness, right? So I think junior engineers are really, if anything, will probably find themselves in a position of power in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. I think about, we've been debunking a lot of things on the human side. We've been debunking junior developers and the need and the rationale for it. Martin, I'm going to throw one at you, kind of a curveball. There's been a lot of push, maybe I'll get in trouble for this one, a lot of push for everyone to go back to the office. And now Gene over here is talking about autonomy, working alone, dark room, pizza takeout. Does he need to be in the office? What do you think? How does this change the world of remote and distributed work?
For folks that don't know, I work in a field in the middle of rural Northern Ireland, so
There is a little bit of a joke there and a little bit of a prod.
this is actually feeds on Nicole's point. There is a news flash. Turns out there's a bunch of snobbishness in tech and a bunch of people who feel threatened try and poke at the thing. The typical, we went back to the adoption conversation, quite often what happens is like, oh yeah, these AI tools, they're no good, and blah, 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 blah. And then people try them, and they're, okay, these AI tools, they're pretty good, but they're only good for me, because I know what I'm doing, I'm an expert. We shouldn't roll them out to the junior devs on our team or whatever. They should have the same kind of hazing ritual that I had to go through.
They have to type in code by hand.
Yeah, exactly. And who does that remind you of? That reminds me awfully of the conversations I had when I came into tech and there were like mainframe things around and all this, and you don't want to be using one of those, compilers. What's that all about? You don't want to be using IntelliSense. What are you, crazy talk? So
Garbage
Only
collector.
dumb people use IntelliSense.
yeah.
I manage my memory.
I didn't do, yeah, I wish I could. I've got really bad jet lag. So I didn't have a formal comp sci education. I came into tech because I like solving problems and found computers were a way of helping me solve problems. And if you handed me, and I live in, where I live isn't a particularly affluent area either and things like that, people do stuff. If you handed me, as somebody who doesn't really know tech, these tools that we have now, and we're giving them away for freaking free, like, oh my goodness, I'd be starting 10 businesses on like doing different things, trying to do different stuff, and I'd be learning as much as I could. And especially as I've got like something sat next to me. When I was learning to code, I had to go like get books from a library, and I was this weird nerd who would order books from the local village library to like learn about stuff. And now I just ask this thing like, hey, can you explain this code? Why isn't this working? How does this work? What's this doing? And it can actually do that. To Nicole's point, the junior developer is going to like fly. And so I think what we're actually seeing is a lot of senior developers, a lot of people, a lot of us, like actually feeling a little bit threatened by that, but not actually being able to rationalize that kind of threat. Because what are we going to do? How are we going to add value? And the truth is you're going to add value by solving problems for your customers super quick. And if AI can help you do that, then go for it. But in terms of what type of jobs, return to office is stupid. So like.
Okay, that's the quote that's going.
Yeah, sorry. This is being recorded.
I can't share details, but like returning to office is stupid.
Yeah.
It's fine in some situations, right? But we don't see significant productivity improvements by being by a forced 5-day RTO, and that's across several companies where we've looked at that data.
And I think, Martin, you mentioned a lot of things, especially when you think about like going to solve a problem. You just asked Copilot for a lot of things that maybe you would have been lurking around a senior dev's door.
Or wasting hours like lurking on news groups and stuff. Yeah.
100%. So I think it's a fascinating time. I know we're almost out of time, but I did have a little bit of a bonus round. So you guys are going to have to go fast.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes, so we have got to go fast.
3 minutes. All right. What's one myth about AI in DevOps that you'd love to bust?
Where are we starting? Got to go fast. Gene.
That AI is only for developers. Man, if you ever had to have an outage and look at a Java stack trace, man, like AI is really good at, I have a personal experience where right before a program committee call, I had to fix something. I got it fixed in 7 minutes and could not have done that without AI help.
Nicole?
That AI will remove developer jobs. I think if anything, it will create entire new categories of development and infrastructure that we need. And I'm not talking about prompt coding engineers. I'm talking about a whole lot of new infrastructure and data management and model management and versioning that is super exciting, and we're still figuring out, right? Martin, you just talked about it. We're
in real time.
Yeah.
And then me, AI isn't the answer to all your problems. People is the answer to all your problems, and you need to, without the people change, you're not going to do it. So AI won't fix everything, sorry, but please do buy lots of Copilot, because that'll give you the job.
All right.
It's easy, people are hard.
Yeah, still, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
So next question, and it's a people question.
Okay.
What skills will developers need in the next 12 months that they didn't need in the last year?
You need to learn how to call LLMs and iterate with LLMs and how to be able to evaluate LLMs. That's not something any of us really cared about 12 months ago, I think.
Mine's going to be, I'm going to change the question, what's the skill developers will need and will have always needed? Communication.
Yeah.
You need to be able to talk about what you're doing, what problem you're solving, why you're solving it, because when you move faster and you can iterate and experiment faster, are you going to do it in the productive direction, or are you just going to spin up a whole bunch of trash code?
Yeah, I'll expand upon that as communication in the service of being able to solve the problem that no one can read your mind. AI can't read your mind, other people can't read your mind. So the better you are at specification, decomposing tasks, being able to describe the outcome that you want, and be able to communicate that to the AI, right? That will serve. I think that's going to be one of the top predictors of performance.
All right, we've got 1 minute left. Time to start a religious war. Agentic DevOps, Agentic DevSecOps, securing Agentic DevOps, DevOps with AI, Vibe Tribe. What the hell do you call this thing? Gene.
Yeah, I think the word agentic has to be in there. I think developers has to be in there. DevOps is not, but it's not just for developers. What is a word that describes technology that's more than just developers? Yeah, DevOps is a pretty good filler for there.
Boom.
Is there one word? Do you have one?
Uh-oh.
DevOps.
I guess, but to your point, it's not, we're seeing PMs and HR people, simplifying processes, changing processes, building whatever they want. I mean, I don't know if there's a great word other than like build better stuff faster.
Vibe Tribe. Vibe Tribe. All right, great. That concludes the session. We've covered a lot of ground today, everybody. Thank you for joining our fireside chat. Nicole and Jean are going to be right outside right after the show around 6 o'clock, so in about 30 minutes, where we have copies of their Accelerate book, and they'll be signing them. So please stop by, say hi to them, have a quick chat, and tell us what you think, and maybe take a vote on the religious war. Thanks all.